Well, hello and welcome to this workshop on carburetors. You might be able to see behind me that I have a CB900 Honda, and I have taken the carburetors off in order to strip them apart, clean them ultrasonically, clean them properly, and then put them back together again. Now you can see here that I've got a single carburetor, and what I want to do is show you how this one gets stripped apart. And this is one of the more complicated ones. This is the number 2 carb, and so therefore there are more pieces on this to look at. The 3 other carbs are the same. They have slight differences, but this is the one that's more complicated, so we'll start with this one. This is the number 2 carb because it has the choke linkage on it, and it has the throttle linkage, and it has the accelerator pump as well. All of the things are identical to the other carburetor banks, so I'm not going to disassemble the linkages. I will leave these on while mainly because it's on an external devices, and so therefore it's easily cleaned. All of the internal parts I'm going to strip apart so I can make sure I get all of the ports cleaned and everything. So I'm going to start off with the air valve, the air cutoff valve. It's basically a diaphragm. I'll just show you it here. This is this plate on the side. I have to move the throttle linkage out of the way to get at it, but basically I've got 2 screws to take off. So we pull out like dead quick like this, and then I have another screw here. Just keep my finger on the plate to hold it in place. Throttle linkage out of the way, and then I can take the plate off. So behind here you can see that there's a plate and a spring. You'll also note that there is a diaphragm and an O-ring. The O-ring is a little unusual in that it is, I'll try and see if you can show it a bit closer. It isn't really an O-ring, it's more of a double flat-sided seal. And we need to make sure that when we replace it, we don't replace it with an O-ring, but replace it with something similar to that. This plate is very important. It allows air to come from this port here into the back of this diaphragm, and so therefore it goes through that seal and into the back of this diaphragm, allowing it to function. It's important that you have communication between this port, try to show it a little bit better, this port here, and the port in the side. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to blow in through this port here to see if I've got communication. And I don't, so clearly that port is blocked, which I'll need to clean out, and hopefully a little bit of ultrasonic cleaning will resolve the issue. No, it's still blocked. So that's obviously an issue that I've got with this carburetor, in that the diaphragm will not be getting air onto the back side of it. So there's that plate, the spring, the screws. And I'll take the diaphragm off now, so you can see what else we're looking at here. It's important to check this diaphragm for splits, and to make sure it is in one piece and that it is able to seal against the grooves and against the plate itself. He's struggling to get that off. There we go. So you need to check the port here. This port's important because it has a sealing surface that mates with this piece here. I'll try and show you the he says I'll try and show you the top of that. Now you can see that this piece here, it needs a bit of a clean, so what I'll do, I'll get some emery just to make sure that gets cleaned up, make sure there's no nicks or burrs, and make sure that I'll then seal nicely against that part there. But again, you can see there's a lot of work necessary to get this particular piece cleaned up. This port here is unique to the number 2 carb again. This is the vacuum feed for the diaphragm cutoff for the fuel line, which is peculiar to the American version of the CB900s. You won't find this on the UK versions. The carburetor has a throttle linkage here, which, as you can see, operates a butterfly valve. And you can see here that there's a choke linkage as well, and I've taken the choke plate off so you can see a little bit better what we have. I'll start off next with I'll go next to the float bowl. Hopefully you can see the float bowl on the bottom of here. The whole purpose of this float bowl is to allow petrol to come in through this port here and to fill this bowl with petrol, and then allow the petrol to be drawn into the carburetor through the jets. Float bowl has a number of functions. Apart from that, you need to make sure that the float works so that when the float lifts up, it stops more petrol going in, because you don't want more petrol in here than you can carry. And also you want the ability to drain the fuel out when you need it. And so therefore there's a drain port at the bottom here, and normally there's a pipe coming off here that drains off to the outside of the vehicle. I've got a screw on the side, and that screw, when you open it a little bit, will allow petrol to drain from the float bowl out through this port here. And I'll just show you what that looks like. So we'll take that apart. It doesn't need to be unscrewed all the way for it to work. So it has a, put that against the, it has a tapered nose on it, and again I'd want to make sure that's clean, and as you screw it in, that seals against a port and then stops the fluid from coming out. And as you unscrew it a little bit, the fluid that can get past there and out through that drain. It's important that the nose of that is in good condition, and you need to make sure that this O-ring seal here as well is in good condition too. Now I'm going to replace that because that feels really hard. So I'm going to take that O-ring off, and I'm going to put a little bit of emery cloth across the top of that port. Next I will take the float ball off. These screws can be extremely stiff. So you need to be careful when you're taking them off. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing, he says. And there we have the float ball. The float bowl has come off. Now you'll notice on this device here that we have a unit on the side. This is the accelerator pump. This is only found on number 2 carburetor, and basically it operates by a diaphragm being depressed from a linkage. You push down that linkage, it depresses the diaphragm and allows fuel into a separate set of ports. I'm going to strip this apart just so you can see what's inside it, and also to make sure that when I put these parts in the ultrasonic bath, they'll all look good. You'll notice that I'm keeping all the screws separate so I don't get them mixed up, so I know where they go. I tried to rebuild this device. So there we go, there's the plate. You can see there are a number of ports in there again. Try and hold it up a little bit closer. You can see there's some ports that need to be cleaned out. I'm not going to blow through those because I know that they're plugged. And there's the diaphragm. The diaphragm's a very unusual shape, and it's attached to the plunger. So you can see how the diaphragm fits. Check that the plunger is clean, which this one isn't. Check that there are no corroded parts in it, which this one has, and so therefore there's a little bit of work to be done to that to make sure it works okay. And you've also got another O-ring seal in here. You need to make sure that that's in reasonably good condition as well. So that's the diaphragm, also the accelerator pump. Couple of things to note on here. You've got an overflow pipe, and so that if the float doesn't work properly and the petrol comes up higher and higher and higher, at some point in time it has to give way, and so therefore it then goes over this pipe and out through the drain at the bottom. I don't know if you could hear that, but by blowing in there you can hear that there is a passage from here through to the drain. So I'm happy with that. And you can look in the side there where you can see where the drain screw fits, and hopefully, I don't know if you can see clearly enough in there, but there is a little hole at the bottom where the fluid will actually go out when you take that screw out. Another thing to note on here is the very, very poor condition of the seal. Let's see if I can take this video. That seal is in awful condition. It is completely flattened, and you should never reuse it. That's the quickest way to get leaks from your carburetor, is not to replace this device, and it'll always be found in a carburetor rebuild kit. when you do rebuild a carburetor, don't use this gunk. This is just absolutely ridiculous. The O-ring seal will do its job. You don't need that, because you can see here how some of that gasket material goes on the inside of the O-ring, and I'm sure, yeah, there are little bits and pieces of gasket material ending up in the carburetor, which is going to kill any carburetor. It's going to plug up ports, it's going to plug up drain lines, it's going to plug up vent lines. So when you rebuild carburetors, do not use sealant like this. It's ridiculous. Rant over. I'll put those over there. I'll put the screws in there so I know where they come from. So I've got my diaphragm, I've got my air cutoff valve, I've got my diaphragm, I've got my float off. So here is the business end of the carburetor. What you have is a number of jets, ports, all sorts of things. First thing we're going to do is I'm going to take off the float. You can see here the float works. It works in this direction. When the fluid comes up, it moves up, and you will see in here when I take the float off that there is a valve that will then cut off the fluid flow quite nicely, he says he hopes. So there's a little pin that holds the float on, and you can see here there's a little valve hanging off the bottom of that, and that valve is an important piece of kit. So I'll try and show it to you against my fingers. You can see there's a little rubber tip to it. That rubber tip will perish and will become hard and will fail to seal, and it seals into this port here. So I would always replace these. There's a little spring inside it. I don't know if you can see the spring depressing there, and that keeps it loaded against the seat. If this doesn't work, your carb will fill with fuel, it'll mess up all the mixture in the carb, and it will cause you the carb to flow fluid onto the floor, which you don't want. There's the float, and there's the float needle. Always replace the float needle. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the primary jet. And I'll take out the primary nozzle as well. There. Now, put the primary jet there. There's the primary jet, there's the primary nozzle. You then have the secondary jet, and then we have the jet holder. It's the one with the hexagonal bit on the outside. There we go. And I'll take that out. So I'll just make sure I put them in the right order so you can see how they all fit together. And then in the bottom of here there is a nozzle that doesn't want to come out. I'll get that out after and I'll show it to you. On here you've got a slow jet inside here, and it's just covered with a little rubber plug. The slow jet is pressed in there. Don't take it out, just leave it in there, it's fine, but just make sure that plug's in good condition and isn't perished. And that's really it. So that's the parts that are inside the bowl. You've also got this unit here. That is the pilot jet. Ordinarily you shouldn't take that out, it's factory fitted. However, for me to get this carb fully cleaned, I'm going to need to take that out. It's very straightforward to take out, but you need to remember it has been factory set for a reason, and it's a bit of a pain to get it set up when you've actually got the bike running. So when you take it out, make a note of how many turns you use to take it out of the position. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 7. So there we go. 7 turns to take that out. Inside here you will find, so there's the pilot jet. You can see it's very, very, very thin. So I'll try and get the very, very, very small point. A spring will go on the top of it. You then have a metal seal, a metal washer that goes on the top of there, and then you have the O-ring, and that's the assembly of the pilot jet. I'm going to replace this pilot jet, and I'm going to replace that O-ring, and I'm going to get the carb ultrasonically cleaned, but ordinarily you would never take this apart, so I'm just showing it to you just for completeness, I suppose. Okay, so that's the bottom end of the carburetor completely stripped, as you can see. The next part is to address the top end, and you have two screws that hold the cap on. I'll try and quickly get these off so you can see it. Right, so there's the two screws off. The cap will come off, and you can see there's just a smooth bore on the inside of it. There's no other parts to take off. Put those two screws in there, and then you have the piston. So the piston slides out quite easily, and that carries the needle. You can see this needle is a actually it's got a taper on it. It's a slightly different taper than I've ordinarily seen, but I'm going to be replacing that anyway. There's a spring to make it work, but I'll just quickly put this together so you can see how it functions. And you can see it slides very, very, very smoothly, and you can hear the air passing in and out of these ports. So take the spring off, and there's a little plastic plug on the top which you just pull off by hand. Inside here is an aluminium plug that holds a needle in place, and once you've got that out, everything else will come out, but you have to unscrew it first, Gareth. Everything will be fine. There we go. So that's it. That's the piston. You've got the plug, and then you have, I'll try and put this all back together so you can see what it looks like. You have a needle like this, and you can see on here that the needle has got, I'll try and hold it against a piece of white so you can see it properly. There we go. So you can see that it's got a number of grooves on it, and it's got a circlip, so you can adjust the height of this needle. And then behind it there were two small washers, and these are to act as further adjusters and to allow the plug to bear down on the top of the circlip and hold it in place. I'm going to be replacing all of this because I don't like these particular types of needles. I'm just going to change it because I've got a different preference, but that's the top end of it. I've now also got the main nozzle, which I'm going to push out, that didn't want to come out earlier, or the nozzle jet, he says, and hopefully that'll come out nicely without too much hassle, please. It doesn't want to come out, so I'm going to use this spare needle to push it out. Yes. Right. So this is the mating part of this needle. So this needle fits into here, and that's how it basically functions. This nozzle itself needs to be put in with the recess facing upwards. And that fits in there, got that there. And then when we finally look at the top here, you have a, there's nothing really in here. I've taken that seal off, which you sort of fly off earlier. And in here you've just got an air jet cover. This air jet cover does two things. The first thing it does is it, surprise, surprise, covers the air jets. Yeah, so previously I was showing you the air jet cover, which we take off here, and it comes out there, and you can see that there are a number of ports inside the carburetor that this covers. The tang is used to control this slide, so basically it sits like this to make sure that the slide does not rotate. You can see a little bit there, but that's not really the main purpose is for it to cover the jets. Now these jets you can see in here, there are 4 jets. There are 2, there's a primary main jet, primary secondary jet, primary main jet, secondary main jet, and you can see the corresponding ports on the other side. These brass pieces are all pressed in, you don't need to take them out, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to take everything apart to make sure that when I ultrasonically clean it, it has the best chance of actually getting this whole body pulled together. So that is the carburetor completely stripped. I've laid everything out here so you can see the way that the components all fit together, so I shall try and show you that one more time. So we have the top here, we have the air cutoff valve, we have the carb body itself, we have the hat, the spring, the needle assembly, the cylinder itself and the seal. Here we have the accelerator pump components. Here we have the float bowl with the various components, the float itself with its valve. Then you have the pilot screw, you have the main nozzle and main jet, and secondary nozzle and secondary jet, and the slow jet plug. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the carburetor completely stripped.